in between, right? So I'm Robert Buxton. It's good to be back at friends' homes. I was here several months ago, maybe half a year ago. I don't remember. But at any rate, I've been at Guilford a couple times. So if you were there, you probably heard some of these pieces that I'm going to play, because I was only there a few weeks ago. In that amount of time, I can't learn a whole lot of brand new things, but I have a few if you were there, so hopefully.
Do you think we'd remember?
Well, do you think of course you'd remember. Yeah, I try to keep it fresh, you know, and exciting. So what I'd like to do first is improvise. I like to improvise, it's fun. And it's what they did in the old days. People like Mozart and Bach, they improvised all the time. So could you help me out, please? We'll pick a few random notes and make a melody. You want to give me a note? F sharp, oh, that's good. Okay, yeah. A few more.
C.
C. Oh, we got the tritone in there. You know, that was bad luck in the old days. Okay, so, not really. In the Middle Ages. Couple more?
B flat.
You said C flat?
B flat.
Oh, B flat, sorry. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Maybe one or two more. What should be next? Sorry? C? Okay. Like that. Okay. Sounds good. It could be from like Lawrence of Arabia or something. I don't know why I said that, but what do you want me to do with that? Anything? Or just create something? Okay. Do you want to give it a title?
Rainy day.
Rainy day? Okay. Well, let's see what happens. I don't know what will happen.
Rainy day jazz.
So, that's it, yeah. Maybe it got into me. It was a good choice of notes. I liked it because it had that little trill built in, da-da-da, which you could do something with. I'm going to start, and again, some of these I mentioned I did at Guilford like 3 weeks ago, so if you were there, forgive me for rehearing the same stories, but I do have some new Paganini arrangements that I didn't do there coming up later. Let's see how we're doing with time. Yeah, I'm going to start off with this Bach arrangement. This is Alexander Silotti's arrangement of Bach's aria in D major, which is a famous piece for orchestra. You know, I'm still doing the violin thing. I just keep finding more violin arrangements, which recap is that I'm obsessed with the violin. And I'm obsessed with Jascha Heifetz and Yehudi Menuhin and Nathan Milstein and all these great, great violinists and their recordings and stories about them. So much so that I really have wanted to switch instruments, but my wife wisely has talked me out of it. And so I'm playing arrangements of violin music at the piano. So this aria is from the third orchestral suite. You've probably heard it before, and probably not on the piano, because it's not really done on the piano. I'll play you the opening just to see if it rings a bell. Familiar? Famous piece. So what an aria is, the English word is air, and it's usually something sung in an opera, normally, an opera aria, right? But Bach didn't write a single opera. Neither did Brahms, by the way, but many composers did, but Bach didn't write operas. He wrote arias, though, for cantatas, for passions, as part of church music. And so this, although it's from an orchestral suite, this aria to me is in the spirit of that music, of the cantatas, of the passions, and whatnot. There's this great spiritual side to Bach's music because his life was completely devoted to that. You know, in Latin, he would write at the end of every piece dedicated to the glory of God alone. I also read, and I hadn't known this, recently read that at the beginning of each piece he would write, "Lord help me," which is interesting. I don't know if he meant it in the comic way, but it was actually really a serious thing. Lord help me. And so it's really fascinating. I think that also there's a quote from Karl Barth, who was a Swiss theologian. He said, "When the angels talk to God, it probably sounds like Bach. It's Bach. When angels talk to each other, it's Mozart." So I'll start with this aria in D major, arranged by Silotti. Silotti was a Russian composer who studied with Franz Liszt. And I think there's even photos of them together. And he did many arrangements of Bach for the piano, Bach organ music and other things for piano. That was sort of his specialty, including this piece. was playing that, I was thinking about the peace and tranquility in that music, and how on earth did he experience that while having about 20 children or so. He did. I have 2, and there's 0 tranquility. It's a good thing. It should be that way, but I just thought about that. So next I'm going to play a piece. This is an unusual thing because it's a piece it's a fragment or a draft of a piece by Beethoven that Fritz Kreisler arranged for violin, that's arranged for piano by Leopold Godowsky here. So it's a triple, yeah. Beethoven in 1793 started writing this music to be part of his wind octet. He was 23 years old, young and green almost. This was before he went deaf. I think the signs of it were there a little bit, but not especially. And for some reason he didn't complete this piece. And a century or so later, the great violinist Fritz Kreisler, he breathed new life into this by writing this piece, by completing it really. And it's called the Rondino on a Theme by Beethoven by Kreisler. So Kreisler liked to do these things, and actually a lot of people at the turn of the 20th century, you could call it neoclassicism maybe, they liked to take maybe fragments or drafts of pieces by composers in the 18th century and reimagine it. Stravinsky did this a lot with Pergolesi and others. So, but what I hear, what I'm hearing in this piece is, it's a, like I mentioned, a young Beethoven. There's a certain innocence to it, because Beethoven faced these demons later in his life. As he went deaf gradually, he isolated himself from the world, and he was quite sad at times, quite lonely and volatile in his moods too. But he always had this great joy and resilience in him despite that. And more on that later, because I think I'm going to play more Beethoven later. But this is 23-year-old Beethoven. Almost sounds like Schubert, although Schubert hadn't been born yet. But it has that more of a Schubert feeling to me than what we think of as a Beethoven feeling. But here it is. couple more mellow pieces. I have some not so mellow, crazy music later. This is another Godowski arrangement. And a few words about Godowski. Sounds like Stokowski, but his name is also Leopold Godowski. He was a great pianist at the turn of the 20th century, around that time, and a great composer and a real master of arrangement, the art of arrangement. He did so many arrangements, including a really crazy, wonderful version of Chopin's etudes, where he made them harder. He decided they weren't hard enough. But I thought, when I heard about this the first time, I thought it was like a circus trick or something. But then I listened to it, and it's actually not. He added new chords to it, and he changed it, he refashioned it into a different piece, different pieces rather. So those are really, if you're interested, Godowski's Chopin etudes, they're really beautiful. Maybe I'll learn them one day if I'm feeling masochistic enough. But here's another Godowski arrangement. This is Georges Bizet, the Adagietto from L'Arlésienne Suite No. 1. And Bizet, who wrote Carmen, he's most famous for writing that great opera, Carmen. The L'Arlésienne suites are incidental music for plays of the same name. L'Arlésienne means a woman from Arles, which is a city in Provence in the south of France, a beautiful city where Van Gogh lived at one point. When I play this, it just seems very French to me. In one sense, the French language contrasted with the German language. Beethoven was a German speaker, and there's something more punctuated about it. Oh, did you hear that? It's punctuated. But French, sometimes when people speak French, it almost sounds like they have cotton candy or baguette in their mouth or something. It's, oh, really, that's how they talk. Some Southerners talk like that too, they don't want to move their mouth too much because it's too hot outside, Shelby Foote comes to mind in Memphis. But at any rate, yeah, I do impersonations. It's a whole other thing. I even put some on YouTube if you're interested. Very, very silly. We live in Alamance County, and my two boys are starting to pick up the local dialect. We were at Walmart, and my 5-year-old said, "Mom, I want hash browns." I said, "What?" "Oh, hash browns." Yeah. So anyway, but I think that language influences music, really, and I think that to me this just sounds very French. It also reminds me of a Renoir painting or something. This piece I'm going to do now, it feels more like a fragment of something than a full piece, and that's part of the charm of it, I think. So here it is, Georges Bizet, Adagietto. And I think that some of that atmospheric quality in French late Romantic music, and Fauré, and even Franck in a way, Bizet, eventually led to what Debussy and Ravel did, really, in Impressionism. So one more mellow-ish piece. This one is by the Swiss composer Raff, Joachim Raff, R-A-F-F. You ever heard of him before? Really? You hadn't heard of him? I can't believe it. Well, neither had I. Really. I mean, I hadn't known about him until I learned this. And this is a piece that a lot of the old school violinists would play, and that's how I came to it. I listened to it. I thought, what is this gorgeous piece, and who on earth is Raff? This is the Cavatina by Raff, which means short song. And if you go on YouTube, you can hear Misha Elman, the great Odessa-born violinist. The way he plays this is just out of this world. And so I looked into Raff. He was a Swiss composer. He wrote many symphonies. Actually, the third one is quite beautiful. I listened to it recently. In his lifetime, people said he's as great as Beethoven, but we don't remember him so much today. I don't know why. It's too bad. Sometimes there's a composer like Bach, J.S. Bach. You know, he wasn't remembered. He wasn't known much during his lifetime. The story is that Handel, who was a very successful opera composer in London, he was traveling near where Bach was living, and Bach wanted to meet Handel, but Handel said, I don't have time to meet a provincial church musician. That's not really nice, you know. Maybe he couldn't handle it. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, that's a pun. That's a very bad pun. I know. Couldn't help myself. But it's like they say, when does a joke become a dad joke? It's when the meaning becomes apparent. It's terrible. I didn't come here to do comedy, but anyway, but Bach had the opposite trajectory. During his lifetime, he was virtually unknown. And it was after he died that we look at him as the greatest of them all. Poor Raff, he was well loved and respected while he was alive, and then not so much anymore. And it's too bad. I think you'll hear, I love playing composers that nobody plays or much, because it's, especially when it's good, you know. And I think this is just a beautiful, beautiful piece. So here it is, the Cavatina by Raff. play some really much crazier music. We revisit Paganini. In the many times I've been here in the past, I've played you at different times. I went through the Liszt arrangements of Paganini's music. And these are the most well-known, and I keep thinking I'm reaching the end of my violin theme, and I just keep finding more things. Like, for instance, I found that Robert Schumann, in his young years, arranged a bunch of the Paganini caprices himself. Some of them are ones that Liszt didn't touch in his arrangement. Some of them are the same pieces that Liszt arranged, but completely different. So I'm going to play some of Schumann's Paganini studies today. So Paganini, I think no violin theme is complete without Paganini. He was a violinist who lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s, straddling those two eras, the Enlightenment, the classical era, and then the more romantic era. He was really, as people described him at that time, a wild man. He was, think more like of somebody like Jimi Hendrix or something. And I mean it, because he was really he had that effect on people. Wine, women, and song is a very polite way to express what he was all about. And so he was this crazy guy, and his music is crazy. He had this very unusual look, because now we know he had Marfan's syndrome. So he had this very elongated face and unusual physical features. People thought he was possessed at the time. And the Romantics, who were sort of a generation after him, but they heard him, they worshipped him because they heard, or they felt the seeds of their own style, I think, in Paganini. So the story I mentioned in the past, Liszt, he was in a slump, he was in a depression, he heard Paganini, and then he just locked himself in a room to practice like crazy, arranged Paganini for the piano, and he emerged as Franz Liszt. Schumann's trajectory was a little different and not quite, it was a little more sad, because Schumann, around the 1830s, I'm sure he heard Paganini live. So like Liszt, he set out to arrange Paganini for the piano and to channel that virtuosity that Paganini had to the piano. But Schumann, around this time, he also damaged his hands. I'm hoping not from these pieces, because I don't want to hurt mine, but the story is that he got some sort of device, a mechanical device, to strengthen his pinky finger. And he damaged the muscles. Now, Schumann also suffered from mental illness. I think that might have been maybe an obsessive idea in his mind, because yes, the pinky finger is weaker than the rest for everybody. It's just anatomy. But Schumann then, after that, devoted himself completely to composition. But at any rate, these are young Schumann's arrangements of Paganini caprices. I'm not going to do all of them just yet, but I haven't learned them all. Many others did Paganini arrangements, which I'm going to learn. That's on Brahms. I'm working on his Paganini arrangements. Rachmaninoff, Rhapsody on the Theme of Paganini. Even Ludosławski, the 20th century Polish composer. So there's a lot of work left for me with this violin theme. I want to tell you a quick story about, just to describe Paganini. Rossini, the great, also Italian composer, opera composer. Rossini was famous for not having a lot of pathos in his life. He was happy-go-lucky almost all the time. He retired at 50, so he could write cookbooks, cook for his friends, and never compose. That was Rossini. And Rossini said that there were 2 times in his life that he cried. The first time was when he heard Paganini. The second time was when he was on a canoe in a lake, and his favorite pasta dish fell overboard. So just to give you an idea how much Paganini, what an influence he had. So here's the first of these Schumann arrangements. Good luck to us all. Thank you. So you see why people thought he was possessed. Now I'm going to play another one of these. This one I played the Liszt version sometime, maybe a year ago, and it's called La Chasse, means the hunt. And it's imitating the sound of hunting horn calls, which would be something like this. You hear it all over the place, and it's usually a musical symbol of the countryside. In Mozart's F major sonata, you know this one, there's the part. Same thing, right? Those are the hunting horns, because that's what they used in those days for hunting. Nowadays, you go to Walmart, you buy a duck whistle. So if Paganini had lived in rural North Carolina today, maybe this piece would have sounded very different. Now, when I played the Liszt version for you, the Liszt version's a little different, in a way more extravagant. He does literal glissandi, like that, imitating the violin's glissandi. The Schumann version is different. It's actually a little closer to the original, but no less effective. It's just a very different arrangement. So if it sounds familiar, yeah, I played it a year ago, but the totally different version by Liszt. So here is Schumann's arrangement of Paganini, La Chasse, the hunt. Just a very not musicological, not scholarly observation. When I visited Italy, I felt like that. And I realized that it was because the coffee there is so cheap and so good. So I was over-caffeinated, and maybe Paganini was, and maybe that's why his music sounds like that, I don't know. But that's not a very, official scholarly thing to say. The next piece is maybe Paganini without the coffee, because I think this is an introspective caprice. And I read that Paganini did not intend to play all of his compositions in public. Some pieces were private, they were like diary entries for himself only. And this one is that. And this one also evokes the guitar, because you're gonna hear some chords like that. Paganini was a great guitarist as well. He played violin and guitar. So maybe that's what he's thinking here. So here's the next one. Paganini Schumann. One more Paganini. This is one that, well, okay, have you ever met a person who was good-natured, even laughed and was lighthearted, and then out of the blue they snapped into a rage? I think of like a Jekyll and Hyde type of, maybe, or maybe you've seen something like that in a movie or something, I don't know, but that's what this piece is, I think, because it starts out scherzando, which is an Italian word for jokingly. It sounds like someone laughing even, because like that. And so it's all good-natured and everything. But then in the middle, it goes berserk. Oops, I'm tripping over this wire here. It's just out of nowhere that comes. And then it goes, at the end, it goes back to being happy-go-lucky and funny. Actually, no, I said a person, but I've met, there sometimes dogs like that. Do you know what I mean? Or cats, that they're just very nice, and then something just sets them off. They just go berserk, and then they go back to being like nothing happened. And that's this piece. The word scherzando is interesting because Chopin wrote 4 scherzos. Scherzo means joke. Is this funny, though? That's one of the scherzos of Chopin. That's people talking. What's funny about that? Well, it has a jump scare in it, like a good horror movie for sure, but I don't know if it's funny. So maybe, I think Paganini has this. there's a kind of sarcastic humor there. What note is that? Yeah, that's a good improvisation right there I could do. Sorry, I like taking stuff. I played somewhere and the fire alarm went off. But it wasn't a fire. They checked and they said, no, it's just someone burned some popcorn, but the thing didn't stop. And I tried to keep going, but so then I just made up some stupid waltz with, it was like, bah, bah, so. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun. So, but anyway, back to the Paganini, this word scherzando. I think Paganini has this, there's a kind of sarcastic humor in his music. And that's what it is. There's a sarcastic kind of sharp humor in all his music, and especially in this one. So here it is. One more Paganini study of Schumann. Or Paganini, Schumann. I'm looking at the time. I probably will, if you need to leave exactly at 5, please don't feel bad. I'm going to go a little over, but I'll try to keep it not too crazy, because I know there's probably food waiting. So this is very important. Rossini would say, food comes first, probably. So that's Paganini. Now we're gonna come back to Beethoven. I'm gonna play the last movement of his violin concerto in his piano version. And I went back and found, I played for you back in November, the first movement of this, which is long. Half the concert was the first movement. And it was for that reason that the first performance with violin was pretty much a disaster in Beethoven's time, 1806. And not to mention, most of the audience fell asleep just in the first movement. But the violinist, Franz Clement, was very angry with Beethoven because Beethoven he handed the last 2 pages of the score to him 5 minutes before the concert. Talk about procrastination. You know, Mozart wrote the overture, I think to Don Giovanni, I think it was, the morning of the performance. Turned out pretty good though, so next time somebody says procrastination isn't the way to, well, anyway, you get my point. But the violinist did this thing in the middle of the concert. He took his violin, turned it upside down, and improvised this fiddle tune, country fiddle tune, to wake people up, and also to show his displeasure to Beethoven. So Beethoven was pretty upset, as you could imagine, and he rewrote this concerto for piano and orchestra. And both versions were forgotten about until years after Beethoven died, and that was when it's really Mendelssohn who brought the violin concerto back. And to this day, the violin concerto by Beethoven is maybe the most loved of them all. But it wasn't like that in 1806 when Beethoven wrote it. Well, the piano version here, it fits perfectly into my crazy scheme to pretend to be a violinist, because there's, you know, I can take recordings of David Oistrakh, Nathan Milstein, Bronislaw Huberman. Last night at midnight I was listening to all this wealth of recordings, Fritz Kreisler, you know, and learn from them, or try to learn from those greats. And I'm going to play you the last movement now. So the last movement is very interesting because the first 2 movements of this concerto, they're very long. The last movement's not that long, but they're very long and they're very pastoral in their character, and they're very philosophical, very deep music. And he was, at this time, losing his hearing. And so there's a sort of philosophical acceptance, I think, going on in the first 2 movements. It's calm on the surface, but it's very intense music and not easy listening, I think. But the last movement here is a lively dance. It's a country dance, a Ländler, which is in 3s. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Probably what they play for Oktoberfest, you know. It has that rustic feeling to it. And I think about that. Why is he ending this with a celebratory piece? If you look at comedies, even ancient Greek comedies, most of them will end with a wedding usually. Maybe that's what this is. I had this other idea for the piece that it's as if Beethoven is strolling through the countryside, which he did very often. And he's deep in his thoughts, many of them quite dark, and he runs into a bunch of farmers having a party and he joins them. Maybe that's one way to think of this. But ultimately, I think it's that Beethoven was a product of the Enlightenment, and he had this optimism in him, despite everything. You know, he wanted to take his own life at one point when he found out he was losing his hearing. He saw no way forward. Really think about that for a moment. I mean, imagine a painter losing their vision. How do you go on? But Beethoven, he kept composing. He isolated himself from the world. He was embarrassed for people to see him. He suffered a great deal with loneliness, and he had this, rage in him, but he had this great joy and zest for life, and you hear it here. And I think that's why Beethoven is so universal, because there's this universally uplifting message there. Many years later, he wrote the famous Ninth Symphony. Well, listen to the whole thing sometime, because it makes the Ode to Joy at the end, it gives it a lot more weight, because the first hour of it is pretty heavy and dark, and he wrestles with that, and then he ends up with the Ode to Joy. And it's no coincidence that Leonard Bernstein conducted that in Berlin in 1989 when the wall fell. And I think that was his last concert. He had emphysema already, but Bernstein lived only a few weeks after that, but that's what he chose to conduct. Very moving stuff. So here is the last movement of the violin concerto, and yeah, thank you all for coming and for putting up with the corny jokes and everything. So.
Handled it well.
Thank you. I would like to do, you can leave if you need to, but one gospel. I'm going to play Old Rugged Cross in a Southern gospel style. Thank you so much for coming and for also being okay with my lack of time awareness. Thank you. Go get some dinner. Sorry.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Many dinners.
Sweaty. Hello. How are you? Henry. Hannah left, Robert to another. You heard most of the same stuff.
Yeah, well, I was watching this in the audience.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah,
I played some strange things too.
You seem to be able to override the piano.
Oh,
Deal with.
some things.
And his left and changed the one.
Yeah, I know about that.
So anyway, they want to speak to you. So
Oh, it's
good to see you.
It's great to see you, Robert.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
You know, I was supposed to play Guilford last Monday, and I showed up, and there was no one there. So I know they've been having some changes with.
I apologize.
Oh no, it's okay. It's okay. It was, I don't know, but I'll be back there, and hopefully be back soon. Here, so if they still want me. Yeah, it's good to see you, Robert. Thanks for coming. Oh,
That was absolutely
well, thank you for coming.
I was wondering if your boys are like learning piano.
A little bit. I love piano. It'd be nice if they played violin, right? Yeah.
It was just awesome. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much for coming. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Hope you come back soon.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. Sorry.
You know, I read a lot of Beethoven's in German and it changed my impression. He wasn't all that depressed.
Well, no, he wasn't. And you can hear it in his music. Yeah, he did. He had a small circle.
Yeah, he
Right.
had friends, and when he created the best music.
He
He
loved
was-
life very much.
Yes,
So.
yes. But I was so surprised because you always
Well, we have it,
show
yeah,
him
it's
so
true.
grouchy and
Right, but he had that, but he had also his
tell me the last piece that
That's
what was
from the violin concerto.
yeah, and who transposed
did
it?
it.
He
He
did.
did it himself. Yeah. I changed. I added. Let me. He actually did